Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Well podcast. Another week. Glad to be here. Love the topic I'm about to talk about. And I got a doctor reach out to me and he asked me this really profound question, which was this: when do I stop growing? Like, when should I stop growing? And the thing is, the dynamic with him is he's getting a little bit older. And so he's starting to get to that point in life where he's saying to himself, maybe I should slow down. Maybe I should pull back. And maybe I should, start winding this thing down, so to speak. And so, he, by the way, to be fair to him, he had gotten to this place in his business where he said, I don't really want to work longer or harder. In fact, I'm in a place in my business where I'd like to be able to pull back and start, pulling this thing down. So, Eric, my question for you is, when do I stop growing? I ask you guys, listen to this. When do you stop growing? When's the time to stop growing? And when's the time to stop growing a business? And the answer is never. The answer is as simple as never. You don't stop growing a business. You never stop growing a dental practice. It never, ever, ever happens. And I'll tell you, it's a mindset. It's a complete mindset that's a mistake. And you've heard me talk about it before, is that this industry was, I said there's an epidemic of underperformance. This entire industry was built on an epidemic of underperformance. It was built in a time when, you got out of dental school, you worked as an associate for 2 years, you hung your shingle, and when you hung your shingle, then you just sit back and you're used as an income stream. We've talked about that as an income stream, not an asset. So you weren't trying to build this asset. You were hoping to put enough money in retirement so that eventually this, you'd have a retirement set up for yourself. So around age 65, of course, that ideal age of 65, that this dump truck would come back, beep, beep, right? And it would just dump this load of cash on you and you would ride off into the sunset. Except that never happened. And 95% of dentists retire with less income than they had when they were working. And, I always beat that statistic so that you understand that if you're still riding that paradigm, that I'm just going to, sail off into the sunset, then you might be slowing your practice down at the time. This is critical. You might be slowing it down at a time when it should be growing. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I got a call from a gentleman one day, and he was in Virginia, a very small town in Virginia. And I remember flying in to see him, and I get to his office, and it's interesting when I get to his office. The first thing he does is he kind of folds his arms and he looks at me and he says, Eric, I'm selling my dental practice. You're not going to stop me. Which I thought, by the way, was interesting because he had flown me out there. So I sit down with this guy and I say, look, okay, that's fine. You sell your dental practice. I don't have a problem with that. But let me ask you a question. This practice you're in, I said, this building you're sitting inside right now, I said, who owns this building? And he said, well, the dentist that I bought the practice from originally. I said, okay, well, how much are you paying him per month? It said $5,000. And I thought, okay, well, $5,000. I said, when was the last time you saw him, by the way? He said 10 years ago. That's interesting. And then next door to him was an optometrist, and he had been paying $5,000 a year for the past, decade without seeing this guy too. And I thought, well, so $5,000 from you and $5,000 from the optometrist. This guy makes $10,000 a month in real estate, and you guys haven't even seen him for a decade, right? That's passive income. And then I said, well, if we sold your practice today, it'd be worth about $400,000. But by the time we get done with everything, and it was a smaller practice. I said, why don't we sell it like you want to, but why don't we actually grow the practice, and we'll bring in an associate, we'll buy a piece of real estate, and then what we'll do is we'll put the practice in that piece of real estate, and then have that associate then pay you rent indefinitely, right? And then we'll increase the revenues so that when you do sell the practice, that you get so much more. See, even if you're going to sell a practice, even if you're going to sell it, even if you're trying to sell a practice, you want to grow the practice. even if you want to sell it off. Matter of fact, I would argue that anytime you own a business, you should be looking at the valuation. And here's a thing to think about. You should always be looking for the max valuation at any given time. In Georgia, we had one of the largest orthodontic owners, maybe even the country, pass away recently at a very young age. You should always be looking at max valuation. So the idea of not maxing out your valuation for your business at all time doesn't make sense anyhow. But then I also want to think about this. I mean, you have attrition that happens every single year, right? So every single year you have attrition. So, I mean, you have patients that are going to move away, change insurances, unfortunately pass away. It just happens. And some statistics say 15% of your patients will literally disappear every single year. That's a lot of patients. So if you're not growing, this is that thought process of you're not growing, you're dying, right? I mean, if you're not growing, then what ends up happening is that 15% attrition. We see this, by the way, all the time in dental practices as they hit decline, right? The office that hasn't been updated in 25 years, the Time magazine from 1993, right? And what's happened is the attrition's taken over a period of time. And then, what ends up happening with that practice anyhow is the people that sell that practice are the ones that really hope that nobody figures out their mess, right? That nobody realizes that this place is a complete disaster and all the patients are either older or gone. The equipment's old. I mean, I would actually argue, what are you even buying? Don't put yourself in that position. Now, here's another thought. So if you want to pull back, so let's just say you want to pull back from your business. You go, well, Eric, but the thing is, I really want to pull back. I want to pull back from the chair and I don't want to work as much. And as I get older, this is going to be more true as I get older. I mean, I don't want to be in the chair as much. There's so many dentists that I work with that work either not clinically at all, maybe 1 day a week, 2 days a week. See, the model was never set up for long-term success anyhow. Because I want you to think about this math for a second. If you had $1 million dental practice, $1 million dental practice with a 30% profitability, that's $300,000. To replicate that same income in the stock market, you would need to have $6 million at 5% rate of return to match that. How many doctors are saving up $6 million? And I will tell you, I've been doing this for a long time and I've met with thousands of dentists, and I will tell you very few. And so what ends up happening is the ideal situation would be to keep the practice. Now, if you're going to sell it, that's fine. You want to get max valuation, like I just said. But at the same time, if you want to pull back, you don't need to sell the dental practice. I would argue you need to keep the dental practice. And then you want to grow it. Right? I mean, the idea is then grow the dental practice. Use this asset. And as you grow, see, when you grow, you get to scale. What I mean by that is as the business grows, you have a need to bring in other doctors. As the business grows, you have a need to bring in more hygienists and you have need for new systems, and you can afford operations people who know how to run day to day. And I'm not talking about the office manager who's been in the practice for 27 years, who's been doing the same thing. I'm talking about a true operations person. By the way, that's not disrespecting anybody. I'm just saying people who have an operations background who can run the day to day. And because when you get those people in, and then you build a leadership team and you build systems, and people are, I was just working with a group this week out of the Midwest, and we were literally working multi-location. We were working on how to create systems so the doctors never have to be in the chair. What if you owned a dental practice that was yielding you 150, 300, 450 per year, and you didn't have to be in the dental chair? And you got to show up maybe once a week, and you got to just talk to your team and talk to your leadership team, and you drove the vision of the practice, and you collected a check. By the way, what are you going to do when you retire anyhow? Stare at the walls, right? I mean, what do? I mean, You can still go play golf. You can go on vacation. You can have the trips you want. You can have the life you want. But the key is actually not to stop growing. The key is to keep growing and to grow at an accelerating pace. Now, that might scare some of you. And by the way, I get that. Like, some of you are listening to this and say, there's no way, Eric, I want to grow and have to deal with that. You don't want to deal with it because you've never worked with a company like mine or another company who can create the systems and show you how to create scalable systems so that you can have that practice. Because you have to keep growing. And by the way, even from a mindset standpoint, I don't know that I'd want to tell my body and my mind that I'm done. I'm telling you right now, the leading cause of death is retirement. And the last thing you want to do is focus on just stopping. And I would be focused on growing myself. Always grow. I mean, you always want to be growing. I spent time, luckily, in my life, and I've probably talked about him on this podcast, but with a 96-year-old who was the most vibrant, learning person I've ever met in my life and was always educating himself and growing and building at 96. You might be listening to this in your 50s and thinking, I want to stop. So that's not the key. So I want you to think about your dental practice. Are you truly growing? There's never a time to stop. You never want to remember 15%. You're probably losing 15% per year anyhow. We need to invest. We need to grow. We need to bring in associates. We need to bring scalability. We need to build leadership teams and systems. So as an organization, you always want to be growing. You always want to build this. And if you decide, hey, Eric, I'm just going to sell this thing off because it sounds good to me, then sell it off. But at least get maximum valuation first, right? And to do that, by the way, am I going to give you more money? I mean, think about this for a second. Am I going to give you more money if the organization shows an expansion or a contraction? So if the last 3 years, right, and your revenues went down consistently year after year, do you think I'm going to give you top dollar for that organization? An organization that's in decline? And I'd argue I'd be looking for a what? Discount. I mean, this thing is a mess. I, of course, would give you more for an organization that was expanding and growing and building. So whether you want to keep this practice or you want to sell this practice, either way, you've got to be growing. And so how do you grow and expand? You have to have the acumen to know. Don't just ask the circle of friends, hey, how do I do this? You need to have people who have acumen, systems, scalable systems, abilities to help you pull back from the dental chair over time. Doesn't matter who you are listening to this podcast. Eventually, you're going to need to pull back from the dental chair. True or false, right? And the more I can get you to pull back from the dental chair, the more time you're going to have to be able to grow an awesome organization. And the more time you're going to have to be able to spend with your family. And the more time you'll have to be able to be a CEO. And more time you'll have to be able to do the things you love to do and you're passionate about. And if you were doing the things you love and you're passionate about and you're making great money and you're leading a great organization, why would you sell it? I think you would find that if you actually had an organization that's scalable, you wouldn't want to get rid of it. And for the individuals who are telling you to sell it off and get rid of it and put the money in the stock market, here's a great question for you. Is private equity right now putting their money in the stock market, or are they buying up dental practices? Yeah, they're buying up dental practices. And so if they thought the stock market was so great, they'd be putting their money in the stock market. They're putting it in dental. And so should you. This is an amazing industry. You're talking about an industry that has profitability 30, 40%. Do you know the risk rate on a dental practice? It's 1%. 1%. There is nowhere in the world you're going to put your money with a 30, 40% rate of return with a 1% risk rate. You never want to contract in business, right? That's a kiss of death. And that's why they say if you're not growing, you're dying. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. If you're listening to this and you are one of these, if you're at a place where you thought, man, Eric, I'm thinking about selling my practice. I've hit a wall. I don't want to grow anymore, or I don't know how to grow, or I'm stuck. Then reach out, whether it's through me and Tower Leadership or a company of that can have those conversations with you. I would reach out. Because one of the things we do is show those companies, we show companies how to do that. We show dental organizations how to grow and how to do it well, and how doctors, you have no idea how many doctors I've pulled back from 4 days to 1 day to no days. And so we want to be able to build that. And if you are doing well, by the way, if you know anything about the sigmoid curve, what you want to do is you want to actually, great organizations make changes during the growth phase. Right? Netflix, when Netflix was, think about this, when Netflix took over Blockbuster, Netflix came into the marketplace and did it in an entirely different way. Blockbuster, by the way, could have bought Netflix, kind of funny now, for like $50 million. And they laughed Netflix out of the boardroom. And so they actually had like 3 times they could have bought Netflix. And so Netflix ends up taking market share over from Blockbuster, and they're dominating the marketplace. And they could have gotten egotistical, right? They could have said, we've got it all figured out. And they didn't, though. They didn't, did they? They said, we've got to change. We've got to modify. We can't just be complacent, because imagine if Netflix today was still doing what they were doing back in 2007, right? They'd be out of business. What they did was what great organizations do is, even if they're growing, they're saying in growth phase, we've got to look ahead. We've got to create better systems and a better organization and more scalability and new products and services. And so they changed, right? They went to a streaming content. They went to a streaming content organization, and they moved away from all. Imagine how many warehouses they had and forklifts and DVDs. I mean, I don't even know what happened to all those DVDs, right? Millions of DVDs gone. And then they did it again. So they built this amazing organization, and then they went streaming content and they did it again. They became a production company. And you'll watch now what's happening, right? Disney is creating their own streaming service. Apple's creating their own streaming service. NBC Universal is creating their own streaming service. So they have to constantly innovate, and so do you. So if you're listening to this and you're the other type, which is saying, "Hey, Eric, I'm doing well. The organization's growing and it's building and it's creating and it's doing amazing things," I would argue with you, what do you need to change? Because you need to. The number one rule of business: if there is not competition, there will be. And it's coming for you. I don't mean to say that in a scary sense. I just mean that as a business owner, as a CEO, you got to know how to get in front of that. So you need to have conversations with people like me. You need to be listening to podcasts like this and say, how do I get a competitive advantage in the marketplace? We all need to be growing. And that's what I want you to get from this message today. How can you grow? How can you change? How can you build? Everyone listening to this has the ability. But you got to be the openness, and you got to go tackle it, and you have to get the capabilities, which is people like myself who can help you build that organization and know where the things that are holding you back. And it doesn't matter whether you're listening to this. It's interesting. You have no idea how many people I've talked to. I just had another one on Monday. Just guy says to me, "This is life-changing," right? There's nothing better than working with someone who says this is life-changing, who was going to sell off their practice. And then once we started doing math together, and we started looking at their situation, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is life-changing. I don't want to sell this thing. I've put 35 years of my life into this. And now that you've showed me how to build out these systems and a way to create and keep this business, there's no way I'd want to get rid of it." And so now that's what we're working on. You literally take somebody who's like almost in this like contraction mind state, and you could see the excitement. It's almost like he lost, like he literally became 30 years younger or something. and his wife's excitement, and they're like high-fiving. And so When do you need to stop growing? The answer is never. Sometimes we need a paradigm shift, and sometimes we need to change a different circle, but we never stop growing. Hey guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I love bringing this message to you every week. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, hit subscribe, hit like. We love having you as part of our audience. Tell a friend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.